Tucked away in the backgrounds of the CCTV are the looming shadows of landmarks scattered all across the world of Star Park. From Velocirapids to Mystic Mountain, all the way to the far-out canyon peaks of Frontier World, it poses the question countless others have asked before. Can we finally map Star Park once and for all? And as per usual, the answer is more complicated than it seems. But hey, nothing ventured, nothing gained, so might as well give it a shot. I'm a Turnip. Today we're going to get to the bottom of this and below, and welcome to Sub-Zero. First off, I'd like to thank Kikolada and Hunt for helping with this video, since mapping things is difficult enough as it is, and they were a big help in tracking down the clues. They also produce some Brawl Stars content, so if you're interested, their channels are linked in the description. But before we get into the mapping, we first need to understand how environments are grouped, because fun fact, most of the in-game locations don't stand alone. Look at the hub in-game and you'll notice several signs, such as Frontier World, Brawlywood, Fairy Tale Kingdom, etc. All of these are groups rather than individual environments, and this has been a recurring system, hinted at in the bad random song lyrics, and even as far back as Barley's Last Call. Most of these groups are pretty intuitive, but I actually think there was a new one that was very subtly revealed to us. See, if you look at the very top of the StarToon environment, you'll find a seemingly inconspicuous TV, but look a little closer and you can see some flashing electricity between its antennas, which spell out dash ... or in Morse code, the letter B. So why would that be important in any meaningful way? Well, if you're anything like me, all you WKBRL veterans out there have the voice that hears you's intro seared into your brain.
From the deep, dark depths of the gem mine to the snowy peaks of Mystic Mountain, from the frontier to Studio B.
We've known every location mentioned in that speech for quite a while now, with the notable exception of Studio B. And what is this environment called? StarToon Studios. And considering Brawlywood is Star Studios, and this is the second studio we've seen mentioned within Brawl Stars, it really only makes sense for Brawlywood to be Studio A and StarToon Studios to be, well, Studio B. And that's important information as we start to put our first locations onto the map, starting with the hub because that's what connects everything together, and thankfully the radial symmetry makes this part really easy. It's basically just a big circle with 6 paths protruding from each point of the star, each one leading to a certain part of the park. But at the same time, that symmetry is kind of a double-edged sword, because it makes it a bit easier to mix things up if you aren't paying attention. But thankfully, we have the candy and hot dog stands to help tell us up from down, both of which are located on the bottom half of the circle. And looking at the first timecode, we can also see what appears to be a gate of some sort right behind Mandy's candy. And since it has that hint of blue in the corner, this is obviously the gate which leads to the main entrance. And in the same series of timecodes, we were actually able to see a zoomed out Poco, who is just to the left of where Leon and Nita did their little heist, which allows us to determine where Haunted Haven is right behind him. And if you have really sharp eyes, look a little bit closer and you can see some strange colorful buildings in the background, which means that this is most likely Super City. But what really nails that down is the familiar face of 8-Bit, which means that this is the Starcade, which has always been located near or in Super City, from the investor video all the way to the Summer of Monsters animation. From there, it's a mission of finding out what this mysterious building is, as it's the only one that isn't immediately recognizable. We can only see it in 3 places, a corner here, a bit more over there, and finally the whole thing in the Ferris wheel timecode. But none of these really tell us what it is for certain. If we look at the actual hub in-game, the gate is at the bottom of the map, just like in the CCTV, and at the top lies the Star Metro, which snakes throughout the entire park. And this is a little reminiscent of the station, but if it was the subway, then you would expect to see, you know, subways, which are notably missing, and kind of puts a hole in this theory. They could theoretically be underground, but you'd expect there to be some sort of indicator of that, and that isn't what it's like in-game, so that leads us to the second possibility, which is that this is a security checkpoint, since it does appear to be a gate of some sort with people going through it, and the whole theme of the hub is security after all, so it's probably going to have a security station somewhere. And on the walls of the building is a painted 01, which in theory could indicate that this is the first of the 2 security rooms. That would also explain why Rick is hanging out near it, since he's probably not going too far when he's on his break. I honestly think this is a 50-50, or it could be something that we literally just don't know about, and may never know about. Kind of like all the broken signs in the old hub, which will likely be a mystery forever. But moving on, Brawlywood also happens to be to the left of this building, and to its left is Fairy Tale Kingdom. Then there's also a couple of smaller landmarks as well, like Mystic Mountain, which is at the very top, Tara's Bazaar on the right, and to the left is the smoldering wreckage of the roller coaster incident, or as some of you may know it better, the golf ball shaped building, which is from the investor video in WKBRL, judging by that antenna on top. However, that's not all. If you look at the camera feed at very specific angles, at exactly the right time of day, some extra details show up, like a hexagonal pattern, which is almost impossible to see unless the lighting is just right, or a weird leaf emblem on the side of the building, neither of which do we see in the investor video, or Starbuck.biz, or the 8-Bit minigame, or anywhere else where it shows up, which seems to imply that this is the biodome, which is supported by the fact that it says biodome on the ring on top of it. And I have a few things to say about that. First up, it seems like they combined these two buildings into one. probably because the golf ball hasn't been shown before in any of the in-game environments, and rather than make it its own building, they combined it with an existing one, which pains me heavily, because what I assumed they were originally going for was that it was probably hinting towards a mini golf course area, which is why it was called a golf ball in the first place, which makes sense because mini golf is a common thing to find in theme parks, but for whatever reason, they decided to mix it with the biodome, because the biodome clearly doesn't have that antenna and it looks far more yellow from a distance. And that would have been cool and all if the biodome didn't already exist in the investor video. So if you've never been to Epcot, the biodome is actually based on this big glass semisphere called Living with the Land, and it's really neat. They do experiments with genuine genetic modification for plants, and they grow a huge variety of flora, and it's ultimately a project designed to uphold long-term sustainability, you know, living with the land. The golf ball, on the other hand, is inspired by Spaceship Earth, which is a whole different ride in the center of Epcot, and now that the two are combined, it brings up a couple of questions. Before, they were two distinct separate concepts with different purposes, and now they are not. And again, if this is the biodome, then what is this supposed to be? A different glass dome surrounded by jungle flora? But that's fine, even if it makes the lore a tiny bit more convoluted and another retcon to add to our lore journals, on the bright side, it makes the map just a little bit easier. So let's forget about that and move to the next area. Retropolis, the home of Brawl, which obviously contains Bowl's Diner, and for the most part, it's pretty obvious where everything goes. Near that is the Gulp gas station, which we've seen a couple of times in the past, and honestly, huge props to the team for keeping the individual areas so consistent in that regard. Over here is the bumper box, which we've seen in the past as well, and just behind that is the shooting star, aka the Ferris wheel, which has been hinted at for years. And this one is actually really surprising because it does line up with the investor video map, which is honestly even more confusing. In the intro of the investor video, we can see the Ferris wheel beside a rocky canyon. And furthermore, if we look at the zoom out at the end, we can see Retropolis' burger sign, which I think was the first time locations have ever been lining up, and holy carp, it happened again in the hypercharge animations, oh my gosh. And the only thing that's really left at this point is what appears to be a parking lot of some sort. But zoom in on that sign and you'll notice some illegible writing on it, and that's because it's mirrored. Flip the image backwards and you can see it spell out the word junkyard. As Hunt points out, if you look at the bumper card timecode, you can find a crane that is the exact make and model of the one found in the junker environment, which means that the scrapyard isn't near Morta's mortuary as I previously theorized, but is actually tucked away in Retropolis across from the bumper box, which actually makes a lot more sense now that I'm thinking about it. Garages, cars, junkyards have cars, yeah. And the last thing we can really glean from all this are those background objects again. Mystic Mountain, Tar's Bazaar, the Biodome, the Velociraptor dinosaurs, and finally the Canyon of Frontier World. And speaking of which, since this is supposedly the other side of Frontier World, that means we should be able to map that out too. Starting at the end of the road, there are a lot of generic shops here. A toy shop, a bar, and restaurant, and, you know, TNT, because alcoholic beverages aren't allowed in the theme park, but families and children buying industrial explosives is apparently a-okay. There's also some sort of stone structure which is called Hermit's Hideout, which might be some sort of ride or escape room, and may or may not be a reference to old western criminals like Jesse James, whose hideout was located within a cavern. Bank and Barrel are up next, and considering Daryl's first concept was designed around a tequila barrel when the game was entirely western themed, I would not be surprised if this is where Daryl was built / came alive. You know, before he started role-playing as a pirate to get out of work. Mike's Mine is also here, which again lines up with the investor video, and right above it is the roller coaster itself. Then we have Shelly and Colt's home base, the sheriff's office, and attached to it is the shooting range, which uses Shelly's gun, and is probably where she got it in the first place. And just a heads up to anyone who's actually using this map for something, a lot of these buildings are rotated so you can actually read what's going on. For example, the sheriff's office should be facing to the left, and the shooting range should be facing the opposite direction. This happens on several buildings and landmarks, so we'll try and add footnotes in the video anytime it happens. All the way at the other end of the environment is Crazy Cart, which is only visible in the very last timecode and cut off screen every other time you see it, and appears to be either a bumper cart or go-kart track. I'm assuming go-kart because there's already bumper carts in Retropolis, but it's kind of hard to see anything besides the sign. And if you take a closer look at most of these buildings, they're so thin that nothing should be physically able to fit inside them. And if you look to your left, you'll see the very same bush that Dynamite's dead body was hidden in until 3 days later he rose from the dead. Hallelujah. Can't wait for the next update where Dynamite Michael gains the ability to walk on water. And continuing on, there's a building with Colt's gun on it, but curiously, it's the only building without text telling us what it is. So I think the implication here is that this is where you can buy guns, but the devs didn't want to explicitly state that the theme park is a registered firearms dealer, which inherently makes the whole operation 100 times more shady, and I honestly find that hilarious. Attached to that is the Trapper, which I'm assuming is some sort of clothing or gift shop, since it has the exact same bear on it as Bruce. And as Bo has been buying things from gift shops to survive, it's a pretty straightforward train of logic to assume that this is where Nita got her outfit, and possibly Leon, considering there doesn't appear to be a gift shop in Rumble Jungle. Trust me, I would have noticed. I have the entire layout memorized against my will, because you have no idea how hard it is to try and map out a jungle. And it doesn't help that they clearly dropped the quality of the stream shortly after it started, because it was probably taking up too much data. But I think I finally have it down, starting with a gigantic smoking volcano, which is very hard to miss. The zoom out at the end of the roller coaster timecode shows us that it's at the very back of the environment, and is definitely a different volcano from the one in Velocirapids. I'm honestly starting to lose track of the amount of mountains that exist within this universe. A bit down to the left, you can see Manic Panic, which I would say is an entrance to the roller coaster, but then why are people going into the volcano? The simple truth is that none of these were actually designed to have a ride associated with them, but it also makes you wonder where all these people are actually going when they enter the dark doorways and never return. And speaking of roller coaster entrances, there's also the Ramblers. Not Rambler, Ramblers, as in plural, because there are multiple of them, for some reason. I don't know why, but one's down here and one's over here, and let me tell you, this did not make my job easier. Is one the entrance and one the exit? It's probably just easier to ignore it. Also, the name sounds suspiciously close to another certain nickname for a character, and I genuinely can't tell if that was intentional. And believe it or not, that is basically it. Rumble Jumble is gigantic, and most of it is filled with trees, plants, a total of 4 cabanas, and more paths. And connecting the paths was actually the hardest part. It's not even important, and you do not want to know how much time I spent trying to understand the layout. Did you know there's only 1 camera on this entire side of the park? A third of the entire area is just missing. All of this is pure speculation. We can see these 3 paths go off into the same direction, and I'm taking a shot in the dark that they connect. They could all drop off into a bottomless pit for all I'm aware, and I would be none the wiser. And this path is completely out of frame because there's not a single camera shot that shows its starting point. Where does it go? Who knows? Not me. And I think this is a rendering error. For some reason, the path is actually more blue than the water itself. And if we look at it from a different angle, there's only 1 river. It physically cannot be the water. This path just changes color for some reason, and honestly, I'm just gonna accept it. Maybe it's a hallucination from how much time I've been studying these stupid pixels. But all of that aside, every full environment we see has been completed. And before anyone asks, I'm not going to be touching any of the roller coaster tracks or any of the interior locations. Partially because I've spent way too much time on the video, but also because we already know where all of them are, and none of them provide any further hints on the layout. The mine is in Frontier World, which is probably where this leads. The arcade is located within Super City, like we covered before, and Bull's Diner is obviously in Bull's Diner. In fact, the only other location that's even a bit unclear is Rick's security room, which could be the security building or a place that we've never seen before. The only real hint is the sounds of screams coming from outside, but that doesn't really narrow it down. But with all that finally done, we should be able to put all the finished puzzle pieces together, right? Right? Haha! Oh, you would think so, wouldn't you? Let's just try to do it. But in order to even do that, a drawing isn't going to be enough, because if I try and angle this here so that it's parallel, yeah, you see the problem. And layering them is just going to be confusing here because we're mapping a 3-dimensional space on a 2D map, which is not a new problem in case you've ever tried to make a map of anything ever. The second dimension is a prison, keeping us from our true potential. So with the power of Blender and my ability to edit 3D models, we will ascend to the 3rd dimension! Oh, so in case you couldn't tell, I have absolutely 0 experience in 3D modeling, but I do have a vague understanding of how to get around in the software, so let's meet up in the middle and go back to 2D. There, that's better. It's not perfect, but it will allow us to line up each camera angle and click everything into place. But of course, there are problems. Frontier World's canyon can be seen from Retropolis, and lining it up isn't that hard, but the moment that you throw Mystic Mountain into the mix, everything gets confusing, because in order for these 2 to line up, it has to be both here and here, which is just physically impossible. And sure, these maps aren't perfectly to scale, but from what I can tell, there's just no possible way for it to be to the right of the canyon from both sides. So either there's a problem here, or Star Park is freaking Pangea. And okay, that's fine, I make mistakes, so let's try it from a different angle. Here we have 2 dinosaurs close to Frontier World, just like in the Enchanted Forest animation. From over here, the green dinosaur is on the left, and over here, the green dinosaur is on the right, which makes sense if it's a flipped 2D image, but if it's a 3D object, we should be seeing its back, which is not the case, and I highly doubt that there are 2 identical sets of dinosaur water slides right next to each other. So what's going on here? Well, if I had to take a guess, which this is purely speculation by the way, these environments have been rendered independently of one another. If you don't know what that means, in animation, rendering is the final step in production, exporting each from a video with lighting and effects, which takes up a lot of processing power. The more stuff the program needs to load, the longer and more intensive the process is going to be. And remember, the CCTV is also using AI NPCs, which are walking around the park and interacting with it, so any unnecessary weight really needs to be cut. For example, you can't see the rest of the park, so why would you include it? Instead, just just give the illusion of a connected world by adding some recognizable pieces in the distance, and that would also explain why Mystic Mountain jumps like half a mile closer despite the camera angle only changing a little bit, which works, but it also leads to problems like this. And I don't know if this was a mistake or a deliberate choice in order to make the landmarks more recognizable, but either way, the result is the same. The CCTV is in disarray. Unless you want to believe that they somehow came alive and move around on their own while the cameras aren't on them. Oh. Nope, not even considering that. It is definitely my new headcanon that the Super City Kaiju was a theme park slide that came alive due to the gems, but we're absolutely not going there. And the more you try and jam these pieces into place, the more confusing things get, like Velociraptors being on the near opposite side of Rumble Jungle, despite being so close to Mystic Mountain and the Biodome everywhere else. Which leads to the conclusion, Star Park can't be mapped. Which I know might be shocking to any of you who watched the last time we tried to do this with proof and things didn't work out, but I actually missed several pieces of evidence which support this. Which again, I have to thank Hunt for pointing this out, how the map machine has the message "you are here, are you here?" blinking on it in the hub environment, which seems to imply that even the maps can't show you where you are, and why the machines are broken in the first place. Or how about the photograph of road signs on StarPark.biz, which caption states, "which way is right," reiterating just how confusing the layout of this world seems to be. Or the actual genuine maps in-game, which shift and rebuild themselves over and over again with each map. We've talked about respawning, but what about the environments we destroy with each battle? Is that a time loop, an effect of a simulation, or something else? And that hidden message from the investor video, we've talked about how Supergiant Store Corporation has control over time and space, but geography, as in the study of the physical features of the Earth, what's stopping them from bending the rules there as well? And finally, things still aren't lining up. If they really had finally made one definitive layout, why wouldn't they keep using it? Sure, there was a brief period of time where they kept things consistent in a single animation, but with the most recent promotion, we're back at it again with things not lining up with what we supposedly know. The hub and investor video were supposed to give us an objective truth, and yet we're right back where we began. And sure, these arguments could all be explained by time loops, simulations, alternate realities, etc., but at some point we have to ask ourselves, isn't it just ex machina at this point? When theorizing comes down to tropes to explain points that don't connect at all, are you really trying to solve something? Or does it just come down to the conclusion that it's not worth the dev's time when 99.9% of the audience isn't even going to give it a second glance? And please, don't get me wrong, this isn't meant to discourage any other people from making maps of their own. I know of several people who are basing it on the investor video or the CCTV, and I think even if it's impossible to have an immutable truth, the whole point of creating is to make something in the first place, even when it occasionally causes more pain than joy. So while the answer may be lame or boring, that's my final answer. And until we get more hints as to why Star Park can't be mapped, there's not much more I can say on the topic. But hey, if you really want to prove me wrong and try to do better, I've linked all the files in the description below. You can pretty much use them for whatever, assuming you don't just steal it, and credit is definitely appreciated. Drawing stuff does take a while, but in the meantime, thank you for everyone who helped on this video, and to you for making it to the end. Maybe consider subscribing if you like the content I produce, and as always, until next time, make sure to have a day as bright as the stars.